Welcome back to Let's Make a Game, a channel about making computer role-playing games using the free program Twine and the Sugarcube format for Twine. We've been looking at combat, and in the last video we made a very simple bit of code for doing a combat between two characters. And the way we did it was we had the stats. In this case we were using armor class, attack bonus, damage and hit points. And we had four variables which were those stats for the player character, and we had another four variables which were those stats for the enemy. And then we had a page where we worked out whether the player character's strike hit, and then we had a page which worked out where the other character's strike hit. And that's not very satisfactory for a couple of reasons. One, we're sort of doubling the code because the player character's attack works in basically the same way as the enemy's attack. But we have two different pages for them. We're sort of doing the same code twice. And that means if we add another feature, like let's say we want to have a critical hit, where if you roll really well, you do sort of extra damage. Well, we have to add it. We have to add it once on the player character page and once on the enemy page, and that seems inefficient. It also means that we can't do, if we want to add combatants. Let's say we want to have a party of player characters against a group, a party or a group of enemies. Well, what are we going to do? Are we going to add new pages for all of them? Again, that seems very inefficient. So what we need to do is have a single bit of code that is an attack and the results of that attack, and have it such that we can apply that whether it's the player character attacking an enemy or whether it's the other way around. And so that's what I've done, and that's what we're going to discuss in the rest of this video. Now let's just quickly see what it looks like. It actually doesn't look any different to the previous video, so I'll get through this as quickly as I can. Okay, so in this case we hit for 1 damage, the enemy misses. We hit for 2 damage, the enemy misses, and we hit for 7 damage, and we've killed the enemy. Let's have another go. We both miss. We hit for 2 and they hit for 3. We both miss. We both miss again, and we hit for 8 damage and we win. So if you saw the previous video, you'll know that that's the same as it looked last time. So let's look at the code. So before, what we had was 8 different variables. So we had the armor class for the player character, the armor class for the enemy, hit points for the player character, hit points for the enemy, attack bonus for the player character, attack bonus for the enemy, damage or maximum damage for the player character and the enemy. What we've got instead is 4 arrays. So we've got A, which is an array for armor class, H, which is an array for hit points, B, which is an array for attack bonus. We can't call it A because we've already used A for armor class, D, which is an array for maximum damage, and then the 0th slot in that array, the first one in terms of the list, but the program always counts the first one as it counts from 0 when it's counting numbers in arrays. The 0th one is the player character's stat, and the number 1 slot is the enemy stat. So we can see that the player character has an armor class of 13 and the enemy of 12, and so on. Then we have 2 variables, $AT and $DE, and they specify who's attacking and who's defending. And that, once again, 0 indicates the player character and 1 indicates the enemy. We don't really need two variables, because if we've only got 2 combatants, if one of them is attacking, well, presumably the other one is defending. So we could have just used one, but I've set it up with 2 because it makes it a bit easier to see what's happening in the code. And secondly, if we want to expand it, let's say we want to have multiple attackers and multiple defenders, or just one or the other, well then we can't automatically tell who the attacker is based on the defender and so on. So we are going to need 2 anyway when we get to doing sort of group combats. So you may as well set that up for the future. And before we had 2 pages, one of which was the player character striking and one of which was the enemy striking, and now we just have 1. So we set the attacker to 0 and the defender to 1. In other words, we begin with the player character attacking the enemy, and then we go to this other page. I might as well just zoom in a little bit. There we go. Okay, so the way this works, I've started by having a system which is broadly similar to that of Dungeons and Dragons, just because it's the most commonly used tabletop role-playing game, and it's a similar system has been used in quite a lot of computer role-playing games as well. So it's probably the one that's going to be most familiar to the most people. So we have Z, which we use for temporary variables. Z is set to a random number between 1 and 20, plus $B square bracket $AT end square bracket, which means the attack bonus of the current attacker. So we roll a d20 in essence, roll a 20-sided dice, which is what random 1 to 20 is the equivalent of, and add the attacker's attack bonus. And then we ask whether the total of that is greater than or equal to the armor class of the defender, which is $A square bracket $DE end square bracket. If so, then that's a hit, which is this code, and if not, then it's a miss, which is this code. The miss is easier, so I'll deal with it first. It simply says if the attacker is equal to 0, then give the message you miss, and if the attacker is not equal to 0, which is what that else code does, then give the message your enemy misses. If there's a hit, then it's slightly more complicated. We set... Sorry, I missed the wrong one. We use another temporary variable, $y. We set y equal to a random number between 1 and $D square bracket $AT end square bracket. $D is maximum damage, so it's between 1 and whatever the maximum damage the attacking character does. Now note that we're assuming there that every damage range is going to be between 1 and some number. So we don't have any capacity at the moment for, we might have a character that does damage equal to 2 6-sided dice. Well, we don't have any capacity to do that at the moment. We'll need to change the code again in order to allow that. But for the moment, we're assuming that everyone does damage which is between 1 and some number, and we generate that damage, and then we reduce $H square bracket $DE by that number, which means $H is hit points, and so $H square bracket $DE and square bracket is the defender's hit points. So the defender loses hit points equal to whatever damage the attacker rolled. And then we have a little message. If the attacker is 0, in other words, if it's the player character attacking, we say you hit for Y damage, for however much damage you did. Otherwise, you say your enemy hits for however much damage. Then, we've already dealt with this code because this is the code to do with the miss. Then, what we do depends on whether $H square bracket $DE and square bracket is less than 1. In other words, whether the hit points of the defending character have been reduced to 0 or less. We assume, as in Dungeons and Dragons, that if your hit points get down to 0 or less, you are, well, in this case, dead. Actually, in more recent editions of Dungeons and Dragons, you'd only be unconscious, but we're doing the simpler and older version, which is that if you run out of hit points, you're just dead. So if the defender is 0, in other words, if the current defender is the player character, then we give the message, you are dead. Otherwise, the enemy is dead, and we give the message, you have survived. So, of course, when one of the combatants is dead, that ends the combat, of course. Or this is the code that happens if the defender's hit points have not been reduced to 0. So either the attacker's blow missed, or it hit but it didn't do enough damage to kill them. And the first thing we do is we swap attacker and defender. So $AT equals 1 minus $AT, and $DE equals 1 minus $DE. So if for either of those variables, if they were 0, they become 1 minus 0, which is 1, and if they were 1, they become 1 minus 1, which is 0. So in other words, they swap between 0 and 1. Obviously, when we have more combatants, we're going to have to do a more complicated system, but for a two-player, for a two-character combat, that's fine. So we swap the attacker and the defender, and then if the new attacker is the player character, then we have a link that the player has to click, which sends them to strike. Otherwise, we just include strike, so we go straight to strike. So either way, we're going back to strike, which is to say we're going back to the top of this page. But the difference is that if the new attacker is the player character, then we will have a link, and nothing will happen until the player clicks that link. Otherwise, it'll just go straight there. And the result of that is that it'll resolve the player character's attack, and then the enemy's attack, and then it will give you the link, and then it'll do the two again. So that is a slightly more a slightly better coded combat system. It gives us the capacity to expand, and we're probably not going to be satisfied with that, because even in the very simplest of games, where let's say we have only one player character, you're still probably going to have fights against multiple enemies at a time. So at the very least, we'd probably want to add that, and there's quite a lot of other features that we could add as well, and that we will be adding in future videos. But for now, I hope that was useful or interesting to at least some of you, and I hope you will tune in next time.